right? If you haven't acquired the necessary reps to deliver the performance that you want, there's no amount of false bravado that's going to bail you out. What's up? Welcome to the Move the Chain podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Munsey. Look, as an entrepreneur, a best-selling author, a performance coach, and keynote speaker, I help athletes, executives, leaders win the mental game in order to take the next steps towards success. The Move the Chains philosophy is designed to help you build consistency by attacking your big goals one step at a time, every single day, with relentless consistency. So you don't get overwhelmed, you don't fall short, you don't burn out. Every week on this show, I'm going to give you the best tools and tips to achieve those big dreams, but also interview some of the world's most successful folks and learn how they've managed to push through, their challenges and how they've come up with their own system, framework, Move the Chains, so that they can achieve their dreams. This week is a solo episode. Last week, I spoke in San Diego at the Women Leaders in Law Enforcement, WLLE, or WLLE, as they call it, conference. And this was the 20th year of this event. It was an incredible event. Very cool to be a part of just such an awesome, lack of a better word, event that has grown over 2 decades and has actually gotten so big that they've capped it right around 2,000 people. And it sells out very quickly every year. My understanding is that this was inclusive of people in all forms of law enforcement. There are detectives and dispatch and patrol and internal affairs, all kinds of different things from all over the state of California. Some people local to the San Diego area, some people from hours away in Fresno, and just again, awesome group of people. Everybody that I had the pleasure of interacting with and talking to, super into leadership and development and growth, and of course they wouldn't be if they're signing up to go to an event like that. So it's always just such a pleasure and so rewarding to be able to contribute to events where people are invested in and interested in that kind of growth. But also rewarding to be able to give back to first responders. I love getting to do that with police, fire, military, anybody who is sacrificing their lives, putting their lives on the line to help and support other people. So that's a little bit of background of the event. This episode specifically of the podcast, I'm going to answer a handful of questions that were sent to me as follow-ups from that event. After I spoke, I had an hour on Wednesday morning, and then I got to hang out for almost another hour answering questions and talking to people, and had a few that were submitted to me via email afterwards. And so I wanted to go through these on this podcast in addition to emailing those answers back to some folks. But the ones that I've collected here are, for the sake of this podcast, all somewhat focused around performance anxiety, kind of the balance between striving for growth versus unhealthy perfectionism, dealing with imposter syndrome, separating identity from performance. A lot of things that are topics that have come up in various episodes here on the podcast, but a great opportunity to just answer those questions directly. So we're going to dig in. And if you have questions, please send them in to me. I'll either answer them on a future Q&A episode like this, or, of course, shoot you an email back and get you an answer that way. So I'm looking through the list here. Let's start with, this first one. What's the difference between healthy striving for growth and unhealthy perfectionism? So this is an awesome question. Admittedly, something that a lot of hard chargers and high achievers struggle with. Everybody who falls into that category understands that we are always becoming something, right? And so that question of, who and what are you becoming, right? We never want to stagnate in our lives. We want to We never want to peak. Our best should always be ahead of us, right? We always need something to strive for. We're either growing or we're dying, right? And again, that idea of never peaking in life. But the trick is, how do you do it in a sustainable way? How do you do it in a way that, doesn't become unhealthy, right? So I think the easiest way to really address and identify this is, where are the motivations coming from? Is it, and what I mean by that is it internal or is it external, right? If it's healthy striving for growth, that motivation usually comes from within and it's optimistic. If we're talking about unhealthy perfectionism, that motivation may stem from fear, insecurity, a desire to impress others. It's usually external motivation, right? Like, we're worried about validation from an external or an outside source, right? If we're talking about healthy striving, again, goals are going to be, goals are a great part of this, right? They're in place. They're attainable. The goals allow for mistakes, for growth. Again, they're sort of set internally, and they're things that we want to strive for. We also have the ability to demonstrate resilience after setbacks, and an openness to constructive criticism, right? Again, we're talking about healthy striving for growth, because we're committed to achieving the thing. We want that success. We want that growth. We want better for ourselves. So you see a little bit less ego involvement, right? The process itself is the fulfillment. That's the journey. And it fosters well-being because we're invested in the journey of our own growth for the sake of growth, right? If we get, if we're talking about unhealthy perfectionism, some of those things shift a little bit, right? Whereas a mistake can trigger some really harsh self-criticism, feelings of inadequacy. We may be less likely to seek some of that constructive criticism because we don't want to hear what we're doing wrong. Our ego doesn't want to hear that. Some of our goals or our standards may be unattainable. They may result in, stress or anxiety. They start to erode our self-value, our self-worth, the way we see ourselves. That type of a pursuit leads to anxiety, to burnout, and it diminishes our well-being, right? So I think if you're trying to figure out whether or not you're dealing with a healthy striving for growth versus unhealthy perfectionism, those are some great questions to ask yourself. I guess one more would be, I said self-value and self-worth, right? In unhealthy perfectionism, your self-worth is contingent upon your success. I think that's a really big one here. That's a big differentiator that can easily be identified, right? Whereas if it's healthy striving for a goal, my self-worth is stable and is not dependent upon my reaching that goal. Now, sure, I may be pissed off if I don't get that goal, and I may double down on a future effort to get there, but it doesn't change how I feel about myself. My self-worth, my identity doesn't change based on reaching or not reaching our goal, right? So hopefully that answers the question on striving for growth versus unhealthy perfectionism. Next question was very similar, right? How do I separate my identity from my performance? Right? This is a great question. Very important area to explore. I've seen this play out for many people. I've had this conversation several different times with athletes who move on from an Olympic career, to Navy SEAL operators who retire after 20 years of, being a tip of the spear, badass operator. I will tell you that from those conversations, from conversations with others who operate at a really high level in what they do, the problem arises when our identity is tethered to our occupation, right? So if your identity is tethered to your occupation, you're setting yourself up for problems down the road. What you do is not who you are. Right? I'll repeat that. What you do is not who you are. I met, this is another one from Navy SEALs. I met a few guys when we used to live in Virginia Beach and was having a conversation with them. And one of them said, look, I'm not who I am because I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm a Navy SEAL because of who I am. And that always stuck with me because I think that's so well articulated, right? Olympic athletes are not who they are because they won a gold medal. They won a gold medal because of who they are, right? And how they move through life, how they attack their goals and what they do. Now, if that's not an automatic, right? It's also dependent upon how they see themselves. And back to the previous question of, their self-worth. And so for a lot of people, especially people who excel at a thing very early on in life, we see this a lot in athletes, right? You become really good at swimming or baseball as a kid. And that is how people start to show you love and show you appreciation, and all the positivity and all the good things in your life come from that activity that you're really good at. And then when you're 30 or 40 and you walk away from that thing and you no longer have that thing in your life, where are you getting your love from? Where are you getting the admiration and all the positives? And if you don't have those things outside of your vocation, you probably have a pretty empty, shallow life, or at least a one-sided life. And so again, what you do is not who you are. So regardless of how good you are at your job, or regardless of what you do, making sure that you're building your identity around your values, the things that you love, the things that you care about, the things that are intrinsic and internal to you, right? If we took away the job, you'd still have the skills, the traits, the characteristics that make you you, right? So those are the things to focus on. That's who you are. Right? So this leads into a question of, if you're struggling with this, ask yourself, who are you? Right? First answer, who am I? Right? Your values, your identity. You define those things so that no one or nothing else defines it for you. This is one of the reasons I hate going to like social events or parties or gatherings where the first thing anyone asks is, what do you do? Right? All they want to know is, what do you do for a living? How do you get paid? Let me now put you in this box of, okay, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a firefighter, whatever, right? Nobody actually means any harm by doing this. We simply can't process everything there is to know about you, the first, a new person that we meet in the first 30 seconds, right? And so it's a way of, I don't want to say it's mental laziness, but it's a process that we have to, pigeonhole people or make our brains do less work. But we're so conditioned to answer questions in that way, right? I'm a doctor. Okay. Now I start to identify as, I'm a doctor. I'm a lawyer. I'm a baseball player. I'm an Olympic swimmer. I'm a whatever. And then, okay, if that's gone, what are you? So just be really careful with how you identify with your profession, right? Again, it's not what you do. So I think it becomes exponentially easier to separate your identity from your performance when you realize that what you do is not who you are. And again, you first have to define who you are. You have to know who you are outside of your work. Let's see, what else do we have here? How can I tell if what I'm feeling is nerves in the moment versus a deeper belief about myself? This is another really good question. I'll say it like this. Nerves are typically situational, right? So then the question is, are the things that you're experiencing, the things you're feeling, do they repeat? Is it a recurring thing? Does it happen every time you do one particular activity? Or is it independent of any one particular activity? Right? Does the same feeling or thought pattern arise in multiple different scenarios? If the answer is yes there, it's likely a limiting belief, right? And that's where we have to get into this conversation about limiting beliefs. And so, I know I'm looking at the list of questions. I know that's a follow-up. So we'll get into that deeper in a minute. Look, thoughts become beliefs. So the more we repeat a thought pattern, the more you repeat a thought pattern, an internal narrative, a dialogue, the more it becomes a belief. So be very, very vigilant over and very careful with your thoughts. If you continually tell yourself, I suck at XYZ, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that's also where language is critical. When we say, this is a flaw of mine, right? This actually came up in a coaching call earlier today. A client says, that is a flaw of mine, right? And so I immediately correct him and I say, if we use developmental language, we would say that is something that I have struggled with in the past, right? And it sounds like semantics, but it's the difference in saying I am a fuck up versus I fucked up, right? We all make mistakes. It doesn't mean we are a mistake, right? And this kind of ties into the previous question of identity, right? We are not the mistakes that we make, right? And so if we have a flaw or something that we might label as a flaw, rather than assign ourselves that flaw, when we say this is my flaw, we're arguing to hold on to it, right? We're attaching it to us forever. But if we change that language and we say, this is something I have struggled with in the past, that simple change in language allows us the opportunity to have a different future. I can engage with that thing differently in the future. Like I've created that internal dialogue. I'm telling myself that there's a possibility that it changes in the future. And so now it's no longer a limiting belief, right? Or that's how we start to break that pattern, right? And so if we go back to nerves, again, they're typically situational, right? Event specific. The feelings are temporary. They often dissipate after the situation has passed, right? The sensation, it's fight or flight, right? So, the situation can feel rapid. You get physical changes like heart rate increase, you get sweaty palms, maybe your breathing changes. In a true adrenaline dump, your eyesight changes, you get tunnel vision. That may not reflect how you generally view themselves, but rather how you perceive the present moment. And so if you're trying to identify nerves or a deeper belief about yourself, this is where I would be looking, right? Nerves only show up or often show up only in specific situations, and they're directly linked to a specific event. You have physical symptoms, fight or flight response, usually accompany nerves, right? And then once the event is over, those feelings usually wane. If it doesn't work like that, if it's recurring and repeating regardless of situation, it's probably a limiting belief. I'll give you a really good tip either way, whether it's a limiting belief or nerves. This is a great action item. And this actually is in one of our recent podcasts with TJ Dillashaw. So one way of thinking about this is you need to make your conscious voice louder than the unwanted voice, right? The nerves or the limiting belief. And so rather than, if that internal voice is saying like, oh, I'm not ready for this. Oh, I suck. Oh, I'm going to get beat, or, oh, I'm not going to make the play, right? That's the one that we want to, we're not even going to say quiet it. What we're going to do is we're going to be louder than that with the conscious voice, the one that we want to hear, right? And TJ talks about this. He says every time he had a negative thought, he would replace it immediately with 3 positive ones, right? So if I have the thought of, oh, I'm not going to make this play, then I would immediately catch it, slam in and say, no, screw that. I trained for this. I'm prepared. I know how to do this. I've got this. I've done it in the past. That's 4, stacking it right on top of that 1. And so you start to reverse that with conscious override. And you want that winner's voice, that conscious voice to be louder than that tape, that limiting belief dialogue, right? That's your inner critic, your limbic system, and it's hijacking your mind. So we can regain control by making that conscious voice louder. And then you can also continue to win by increasing the frequency, right? So if you have 1 negative thought, you have 3 or 4 positive thoughts on top of it. And then the other thing is in those moments, make sure you're focusing on the actions that are required to deliver your desired result. And what I mean by that is, or an example is like, if I'm shooting a free throw, right? So let's say I have a free throw in front of 100,000 people to win the national championship. The game's on the line, it's tie game, no time on the clock, or down by one, and I've got 2 free throws. And if I miss them both, we lose. If I hit them both, we win. If I hit one, we go to overtime, right? A lot of guys will just say like, all I have to do is hit one, right? And I think that's where normal people or mediocre people would even kind of falter, right? Because I know when I was in high school, I could hit 9 out of 10 free throws, right? Like I was the guy that went in and I shot the technicals because I could hit 9 out of 10 in practice. So if I can hit 9 out of 10 in practice, why then when I step to the line in the moment would I say, okay, 50% is acceptable? Like, no, it's not. I'm not going to allow that to be my standard just because of this moment, right? And so you have to forget about the moment. If you're thinking about the moment, you're not focused on the actions required to get the result, right? So I forget about the score. I forget about the crowd. I forget about the event, whatever it is. And I just go back to, I shot so many free throws. I haven't touched a basketball in 3 years, 4 years. And I can tell you, I put my right big toe, there's a nail in the middle of the free throw line. You put my right big toe goes right on that nail. I dribble the ball 3 times. I spin it once, dribble it twice, get my fingers on the grooves right where I want them, and then I shoot the shot. That was my shot process. And I did it so many times that even though I haven't shot a free throw in 5 or 10 years, I still know what I would do. I still like that is wired into me because of all of the accumulation of reps. Okay. So I have to focus on the actions. Those are the actions. That's my shot process that I need to execute in order to make that shot. Right. And so then when I'm shooting it, I'm looking, there's 3 hooks. No matter where you stand on a basketball rim, there's 3 hooks that face you. I pick the middle one and you just envision the ball going right over the top of that middle one. And I actually learned that from a guy named Del Curry. You probably don't know who he is, but he has 2 really famous sons. One's name is Steph and the other's name is Steven. Steph Curry is a pretty good shooter. And I was fortunate enough to learn how to shoot from their dad at a Roanoke College basketball camp way back years ago. So 3 hooks on a basketball hoop. You find the middle one when it's facing you. Ball goes right over the top of that middle one. Okay. I think that answers that question. So let's look through, are performance anxiety and feelings of not being good enough connected, or are they separate issues that just show up together? They absolutely can be connected, right? Performance anxiety and feelings of, let's shorten that, say feelings of inadequacy and performance anxiety can certainly be connected, right? I would categorize feelings of inadequacy as a type of performance anxiety, right? Certainly not the only type of performance anxiety, but one of them for sure, right? Feeling like you're not good enough can be both a truth and it can be a lie. It is a truth if you have not done the preparation, right? If I had never shot a free throw in my life and then I walk out and same scenario, the game national championship is on the line. We're down by 1 and I get 2 free throws. It would be a truth for me to feel unprepared to execute in that moment. I've never done it. Give me a 30-yard field goal to win the Super Bowl. I've never kicked a field goal in my life. Why should I have any expectation of being able to execute that? Right. So if I feel inadequate in that moment, if I'm having performance anxiety, that's not a lie. Like, I'm not prepared. I haven't done anything to expect to be able to come through or execute or perform the way I want to in that moment. Right. So performance anxiety or feeling like you're not good enough is a truth if and when you have not done the work to be prepared. Right? If you haven't acquired the necessary reps to deliver the performance that you want, there's no amount of false bravado that's going to bail you out. You're simply not prepared, and your ceiling for performance is going to be limited. Now, on the other hand, that feeling like you're not good enough is a lie, and it is a limiting belief if you've put in the work, but still feel like you're inadequate, right? So again, in our example of free throws, if I step to the line with the game on the line and I feel inadequate, that's a limiting belief, and it's a lie, because as I told you, I've put in the work. I've shot hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of free throws. I could do it with my eyes closed. Maybe not as well as Michael Jordan, but there was a time where I would have put money on making that. But in that moment, if I felt inadequate, that would be a limiting belief, right? And if we're experiencing limiting beliefs, that requires us to dig in and to ask hard questions to find out where this is coming from, right? Why do I believe this? What is the root of this? When have I felt this way in the future? What am I doing when I don't feel this way? And again, as I mentioned earlier, we really need to use developmental language to give ourselves the opportunity for a different future. So I want to dig into limiting beliefs a little bit more here now, because that's the second time it's come up in this line of questioning. And it's actually a direct question here in this list of questions that I got: how to uncover the root cause of limiting beliefs. What we really need to do is we need to reflect on where these beliefs originate. And that can mean going as far back as childhood experiences, all the influential relationships in our lives, the things we learn from our parents, the things we learn from our spouses, the things we learned from coaches when we were kids, from brothers and sisters and, best friends, the people in our lives, right? All of those have more influence on us than we realize. Significant failures, social conditioning, all of these things shape our belief systems about not only ourselves, but the world around us and how and where we fit into it. And so then we need to use techniques, like I started to mention a minute ago, with persistent why questioning. Like, be a 2-year-old, why, right? Ask yourself, why do I feel this way? Answer it. Okay. Why? Where does that come from? Answer it. Why? Where does that? Keep digging, keep going, layers of the onion deep, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers deep. And you'll start to really get some helpful answers at that level. And that helps you bring awareness to some of those underlying beliefs. And once you're there, then you have an opportunity to restructure some of those things, and you either continue them, or at least now they've moved from being a blind spot to something that you're consciously aware of. And again, that provides you the choice of, do I want to continue this or do I want to change this? So tracing these beliefs back to their earliest source is really the work that we have to do. And it's hard, right? It takes a lot of time. Sometimes we can do it on our own. Sometimes we need to have conversations with coaches or family members or somebody you trust or a professional listener, if that means a therapist or whatever. If we're looking at a step-by-step process here, it would be identifying the belief, right? So you're going to start by pinpointing, what's holding you back? Where is this occurring? It'll show up a lot of times as excuses or why you don't pursue something important, right? Or why you're not going after the things that you want. Right. So that's one, is identifying it. Step 2 is the persistent why questioning. Right? And kind of 2B or step 3 or 2 part B is, reflect on your life history, right? Reviewing impactful moments or, societal, messages, conditioning, family upbringing, education, personal failures, setbacks, achievements even, right? And pay particular attention to the emotions, fear, shame, guilt, desire for safety that may arise when you think about those experiences, and that also may have conditioned your beliefs. And then step 4 is challenge that belief, right? Is it actually true, or is it just a story you've created or absorbed? Right? Consider the logical and the emotional evidence, both for and against it. right? Really investigate it and, put it on trial. This is the scientific method, right? I think this is one of the reasons that I've gotten so good at this. I mean, I'm trained in sciences. I took every imaginable science in college, and I think like a scientist, and that is, we're not trying to prove anything. We're trying to disprove everything. And so if I find something that I think I believe, I'm not trying to prove it. I'm trying to disprove it. How can I poke holes in this thing? And the only thing that stands that test are things that are pretty damn rock solid, right? And so if you can challenge the things that you think you believe in to the point where they can't be challenged anymore, they're probably pretty true. And I would encourage you, if you're listening still, to get really comfortable challenging what you think you believe in. Also consider how others might see the situation, right? That really accounts for our perspective and any societal conditioning. Would my mom see this differently than I do? If I had a kid, how would they see this, right? And so generationally, we can see things differently too. And so then the final step is, releasing any, emotional energy or pain or attachment that we may have, to those limiting beliefs, right? You have an awareness of it now, and then you get to choose. Do I want to continue to hold on to this thing? Don't get caught up in that sunk cost fallacy. Just because I've believed this for so many years, doesn't mean that I have to continue down that path, right? You don't have to carry shame or anxiety or guilt. You don't have to assign those once you recognize, that this is what's happening, right? We all have limiting beliefs. We're all guilty of this at some stage and to some degree, right? And the trick is finding them and, getting past them so that they don't continue to hold us down or hold us back, limit us, right? That's why they're called limiting beliefs. The better you get at identifying and releasing these, the less you hold yourself back. All right. So that's a wrap on this episode of Move the Chains podcast. As always, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with some awesome guests. We've got some really, really cool guests lined up over the next couple of weeks, months. It's a little bit of a busy time right now. So if we miss a couple of weeks, the podcast isn't going anywhere. Just scheduling guests and getting high quality guests and great episodes for you is a priority. I don't want to just talk to anybody just to put an episode out every single week. So that's my promise to you is if we put an episode out, it'll be worth your time. That's it. So again, thanks for listening. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with somebody who will benefit from the things that we talked about. And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.